Alright everybody, tonight we're going to check the gap on our piston rings. These are plasma moly rings, and they are pre-gapped, but I don't trust anything pre-gapped, so I'm going to put them all in, and if I choose to tweak the gap on the rings, then I will tweak the gap on the rings. So to start with, we're going to use the top groove, and very simply, one at a time. Put them down about halfway in the bore, and using an old piston, there's a story behind this piston, but using an old piston will keep it square in the bore, so you know your gap is going to be accurate. I don't know what the gap is going to be just yet, so we're going to start small and work our way up. We'll start at 11 thou. It should be kind of the beginning. Loose. 12. 13. Oh, we're getting somewhere. Gotta go thicker. I have not used these before. They're brand new and still stuck with the shipping oil. We're getting close. There. Nice bit of drag. It'll actually hold the tool. Let me just grab my Sharpie. Just grab my Sharpie.
Should be on top of this toolbox.
On the top?
Yeah. Or it might be still on the floor.
Oh, there it is.
Oh,
Off
okay.
this side. So top ring, 0.016. Now we're going to put the other three in on this side and see how consistent we are. Make sure they're orientated the way they're going to be in the cylinder. Doesn't really matter for gapping, but just for my brain, makes me happy. Now, one thing they don't tell you about file pit rings is they give you options, right? They give you the option to build one for naturally aspirated, build one for lots of miles but no racing. Build them for nitrous and blower applications. There's different ring gaps to select for all of that, and that's with full file fit rings. And I've done them before where I'm like, oh, you never know, I might go nitrous, or might put a blower on it eventually. I want the option. And all it ends up usually doing, especially when you're running a 5-speed, when you're tearing on her and you're in 3rd gear and you let off and just leave the engine decelerate on its own with compression, and even when you're running really good oil, which I have found there are better oils for it than not, you can get a haze out of your exhaust. Basically, the slightly larger gap on the rings will allow just a smidge of blow by, and it's not cool when you take your cool muscle car and just finish racing somebody or playing around on the street. There, look at that, nice and consistent. And anyway, you get a big fog of blue smoke at your tailpipe. Looks like it's a piece of junk, and you know better. You know it's not. Ooh, he is a little bit larger. Okay, we'll come back to him. And he's good at 16. He's actually a little bit tight, but I'm going to call that a tight 16 because I don't have to fight it. Alright, so 16 and 16. Top. And I don't have the numbers I need right now. I gotta do a quick bit of research to find out what gap I'm actually after. Hopefully it's 16 thou for the top ring, and I can move right on to the bottom ring. That would be fantastic. Bear with me for a second while I find my there, 17. That'll. But anyway, my recommendation is to really just know what you're after. Oh, you know, she's a really tight 17. Like, yeah. Okay, 17 thou. I'm good with that. When you're talking a 1 thou inconsistency, it's not that detrimental for what I'm building for this engine. There we go, top rings for each, and leave them in the cylinders until I'm ready to assemble them onto the pistons. So I just push them down further than I need. And I'm not worried about them being centered anymore. Blah, blah, diddy, blah. So onto the second ring, the second compression ring. And we don't have to gap our oil rings. I don't know if you know that or not, but someone might ask me. The oil rings are just for oil control. They've got their own gap on them. You're pretty safe. All right, compression rings. Just want to make sure. Okay, this one goes this way. Since we had good consistency on our top compression ring, we're going to go straight to putting in the second compression ring. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay.
So is it certain ways that it has to go in?
Yeah, there's a way the back side is shaped. This is beveled off a little bit. I don't know how well you can see it, but they are beveled down, and there's usually, not always, but usually a little orientation dot. There, I can barely see this one right here. It was much more pronounced on this guy there. Right there, and same thing here. And again, you can barely see it there, but I've got them matched for sizing. Same thing down on the number 1 compression ring. There's a little dot right down on it. So as long as you follow the consistency of it, you really won't mess up. When you're gapping them, I can tell you got to bring a whole bunch of patience, because the first couple that you're doing, you really end up having to put it in, file it. Well, put it in and measure it. You'll have next to no gap. You'll have like 4 or 5 thou gap. And then so you pull it out and you file it. You don't want to file it too big, so you only run the filer a few rotations and you check it. And you go back and, oh, I only knocked it off a thou or two. And once you get comfortable with it, you start railing right through it, and you get a good process going, and you get quite fast at it. And by the time you hit the 16th ring that you've been gapping, you get it pretty damn close. Like you start counting when you're filing by hand, you start counting how many times you're filing. You're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or whatever. And so you'll file it that much, or almost that much right off the bat. Okay, so, I'm gonna call that 16 for the second ring. Yep, she holds. Oh yeah. Yep. Okay, top and second. $16 right across. All right, now I'm going to go to the other side. I'll leave those rings in there, and we will do the same thing. Wash, rinse, and repeat. I love building engines. I love assembling them. I love going through everything, prepping, cleaning, getting it all done. I hate the repetition. You do something once, you're doing it at least 8 times, if not 16 times, if not 32 times. Of course there's no way. It should stay there anyway. So again, starting with the top ring. To just wipe out these cylinders real quick. Get all the honed them out. Deglazed them basically. Got a crosshatch back in them. This thing was bored out 30 thou over several years ago, and with all the torture I've given it, actually I've got less than half a thou of taper all the way around, so I'm quite happy with that. I mean, someone might comment and say, hey, what do you mean they're optional file pit? They're either file pit or they're not. Well, you're technically right. But when you take plasma moly rings, they are made of the exact same material that file pit plasma moly rings are made of. Because they don't have a special one for the gapped already. I don't deal with gapless rings. I'm not interested in going to that extent at this point in time. And I just happen to think that if I feel like, adjusting it, I'm gonna try the 17 on that one. That's a healthy 16, yeah. Let's try the 17. Now, if I was if I was building this thing to run down the track, race hard, I'd want to open the gaps up a little bit. I'd probably go with an 18 thou gap, but I would make them all match. I wouldn't be nickel and diming it, or I wouldn't be just, you know, a thou difference, whatever. But this is going to see a little bit of track time. The car always has. Yeah, it's got some good drag, and I don't want to. Primarily, it's going to be for street. 17 for all. Nice.
Nice.
Yep, 17. One thing when you're measuring engine stuff and you're doing thousands of an inch, Don't get hung up on the details. You can start actually screwing yourself up, like when you're setting valve lash or anything like that. Go with your gut. Oh, 17? Okay, cool. Move on to the next one. If you gotta go 10 thou or 20 thou gap. I have so many times gone back and forth and back and forth, and then, you know, I've done one full side in the blink of an eye, and then you go to the other side and you get to like the second last cylinder, and then you start screwing around. You're like, oh, it's not quite perfect. You try. We always try to improve as we go, but all we end up doing is overthinking the situation, and we mess up. Besides, you know, you're doing valve lash, you're going to lash them again. So if you lash them, if you're within a thou, it's not going to hurt how the engine runs. If you're 5 thou, oh yeah, you're going to have a bit of misbalanced. One cylinder's going to pull a little more vacuum, or another one's not, or if they're too far out, you can burn a valve. But you'll know it's going to run like a bag of dirt. So 17 thou. 17. That's for the top ring. Now we put the second ring in. There's my duck. Dots are a little bit hard to see, but once you start chasing the shape, basically, then you know which way you're going. As being the second ring, the bevel on the ring goes down. The first ring, the bevel goes up. It's just how the exhaust gases hit the ring versus the crankcase pressure on the underside. Oh, and if you forget, you still have to drop your other rings down. You won't get your feeler gauge in if you're butting up against the next ring. I really hope that I won't have to gap these. I'm pretty confident I won't. I just don't want to spend time.
So how would you gap them if you needed to gap them?
I have a ring filer. It's basically a form of a grinding disc on a little hand crank, and you just screw it down to your bench, and you hold the ring against it. One of these days I will put some file gap rings on, file to gap, and I'll show you how you would do it. Mystery size, about 16. Volume 16. And that stands to reason, because generally the second ring is either the same gap or a little bit smaller gap than the top ring. The top ring has all the force, all the heat, and so it generally needs to be a little bit smaller. What was that, 17 or 16?
17.
17, thank you. So perfectly consistent. And like I said, if I wanted to, on this side, I could open them up, but trying to open them up with thou and then buff the edges of the ring to get the sharp edges off and everything for a thou, no sir, not a plan. Anyway, I'm gonna take a break, check my specs, see if that's where I want my gap to be, and then we'll continue later on. Alright guys, I'm just finished checking my calculations. These are Keith Black forged pistons I'm using. They no longer make them, but they do make the exact same piston in Icon, which is Keith Black's forged line. They just moved it over their Icon race piston. So, having done that, I checked, and my calculation is my bore times 4 thou, which is 4.030 times 4 thou, which gives me 16.12, basically 16.12 thou, or 1623 thou. 16 thou. As I've got 16 and 17 thou, I'm really happy. like I said, 1,000 is not going to kill me for this engine. It's going to see more street use now than pretty much for the rest of its life. Now, if you were gapping your rings, you were filing them, and you went to you turned it a couple turns too much, your gap was a little bit larger. What you would do, even from an engine straight from the machine shop that's been torque plate honed and the whole deal, you can still take those rings and you can swap them into different cylinders to measure your gap, and you will find one that's slightly tighter or slightly looser, and you can gauge it off of that. So I have had to do that, where actually with this engine and with the previous 408 stroker I had in the car, I had to, you're going, you got a good groove going, but one ring just, you got a little more tension on it than you thought, and you just file it a little bit bigger. Well, you start swapping. At the end of the day, you're swapping, you're marking your spots where the rings go, you're taking each ring, you're putting it on a piece of paper with that gap for that cylinder, and you start mismatching everything until you get the most even gap you can get. And frankly, between 16 and 17 thou, it's freaking even. So again, I'm extremely happy with getting good wear and longevity, and that's what I'm after with this block. Quick blurb about the block. This is a 1998 Magnum 360 block. I have taken the time to clearance the crankshaft and the connecting rods. Well, basically clearance the connecting rods. If we come in a little closer, I can show you on this side right here. This little tiny bit of metal on the edge of each one interferes with the connecting rod. They're an H-beam rod. These are what they look like right here, and just next to the edge of the bolt. So quick little bit with a die grinder and a burr bit, and I got to do a slight bit of just not even a sanding touch up, just literally lick it with a piece of 240 sandpaper to match what I've got with the bore for my finish on the bore, and that'll take care of a clean check done. So this is my Eagle Polish crank. I've got the Eagle H-beam rods and the Keith Black forged pistons. I've had the assembly balanced. Now, as for the block itself, all the deck surfaces are clean and good to go. I checked them for straightness, nothing warped, nothing out of play here. Now, if you look at the intake valley, there's been some extensive grinding in here. I did this years ago. Part of it I kind of lament on doing actually now, having learned a few things about oil control stuff. But you see these. This is for any Mopar small block out there, 273, 318, 360, 408 stroker, 440 stroker, small block, whatever you want. If you want number 4, 3, and 2 main bearings to live at high RPM, you cross this over. Now, if you come around, I should be able to show you. So here's the front of your 2 lifter galleries, and the way the oil flows in this engine, it goes in the oil pump, and I might be able to show you at the back here. Sorry, I'm jumping around here a little bit. But yeah, so this is oil pressure feed, and it feeds up to the oil pressure sensor. Right there's the hole for it, and it also feeds direct oil to number 5. Number 5 has dedicated oiling all the time. Never lose pressure unless your pump shits the bed, or you just got no pressure in the engine in the first place, and you're not going to get very far anyway. So number 5 gets its own oiling, and then what happens is the oil, as it shoots up to the oil pressure sensor, it goes to this little guy right here. That's the back of your passenger side lifter gallery. And of course that's the driver's side lifter gallery access plug. So what happens is, as the oil goes through, it goes in the lifter gallery, and it also shoots down to the cam journals and to number 4 and number 3 and number 2 and number 1 main bearing journal. So if you come around here, it basically is like a V. It comes from here, goes straight down to number 1. Actually, sorry, they don't go to the cam bearings first. They go lifter gallery on the passenger side of the block, to number 4, 3, and 2, and 1, and it's almost a V, boom down. And then what it does is each one of them shoots up to the cam. That's why we got the little hole in the center. That's the oil feed for each cam bearing. So each one goes up to the cam journals. Number 5 again is dedicated, but with number 5 main bearing. But it also shoots off from number 1 in a Y, up, or a V, I guess you would say. Anyway, it shoots up and fills up this lifter journal. So what you do to gain high RPM stability in your oil and better control it and keep your mains going, because the deal is, these are all 90-degree passages. So the oil comes up and in, and it shoots straight this way all the way to the front of the engine. And the 90-degree ports, well, at a 90 degree, what's going to happen with any kind of flow? It's going to go straight, and some of it's going to go down. But when you're doing high RPM and you're screaming oil pressure and your pump's just a churning, it's going to bypass number 4, 3, and 2 by about 80%. Kind of pulled that number out of my head, but it seems realistic to me. I have seen many small blocks that were used for high RPM fun, abuse, whatever, where 4, 3, and 2 are scored up way more than bearings number 1 and main bearings number 1 and main bearings number 5. Because those two get dedicated oil all the time. Once it deadheads here, it's gonna hit number 1, and then the pressure backfeed goes 2, 3, and 4. So to alleviate that issue, you run the oil up, you allow the oil to run up into the lifter gallery, and where it goes to number 1, you actually put a second core plug in to block off the flow going down to number 1 main bearing. You'd say, why would you do that? You're going to start with oil. Well, that's where this crossover tube comes in. So you block it off, and now you've got number 5 has its own oil. Number 4, 3, and 2 are dedicated with just the sole oil from this lifter gallery. So from there, you've got a way better chance. The oil's going to basically deadhead sooner, faster. It doesn't have a lot of, it doesn't have any pressure loss over here anymore. The only pressure loss really is through the lifters, lubricating the lifters and filling up with a lump of oil. So those 3 get more dedicated oil. Then you run a crossover tube from this lifter gallery over to the passenger side lifter gallery, because you've cut the oil flow off. You no longer have any oil flow to number 1 main, number 1 cam bearing journal, or this whole side of the lifter gallery. Put a crossover tube in, just a copper pipe, make it low enough to fit under the intake, and on this block, because it's a magnum block and the lower rocker arms, you've got the spider plate that holds down the dog bones for the rocker arms, and you got to make it clear all that. It's very doable, very simple. Easier on an LA style 360, but almost no difference at all. You just got to be a little more creative with the bending of the copper piping. And then yeah, this side fills up with oil, and it forces oil down to number 1 and number 1 cam journal. So there you go. You have lifter gallery 4, 3, and 2, lifter gallery number 1. Number 5 is on its own, and it works. I have done it. I have saved engines by doing it because, like I said, I'm not easy on them. It's the whole reason why I'm rebuilding this one again. I broke the end of the crankshaft off. It was a scat stroker kit that used to be in this block, and yeah, I snapped it just after number 5 main journal with the high speed on slicks at the track. It actually fractured the crank then, but it didn't show up till, like, I basically, that was the end of my season anyway. I probably parked the car about 3 weeks later, did a couple more cruise nights, and that was about it. Parked it for the winter. Springtime rolls around, I take it out for cruise night. My oldest daughter comes with me to like driving it home, and we stop at our usual burnout spot. Did a nice big nasty burnout. Car was running great. After the burnout, I felt a little something weird in the engine. Just more or less heard a sound and felt a little vibration. And yeah, we didn't make it around the corner, and the car started vibrating like crazy. The engine was just starting to hammer all over the map and shake, and so I let it idle, coasting it around. I didn't want to shut it off in case I couldn't get it going again. Damage was already done, so just trying to make it home. Made it to within about 100 feet of my driveway, and it went, stopped dead. So anyway, pushed it in the driveway, Later on that night, I fired it up and it rattled like a son of a bitch. Like it didn't even want to run properly. Like it wound over, like the timing was out and everything else. I'm like, okay, something bad is broken in here. We pulled the engine out the next day, and sure enough, I could take number 5, or I could take the crankshaft, and I could move it back and forth over half an inch, almost 3/4 of an inch actually, just on its own. Nothing else was moving. So it didn't damage any of the bores. It didn't throw any pile, like there was a little bit of metal in the oil pump. I mean, you're gonna have something get sucked up, but it really didn't damage what it could have damaged. If it had been a connecting rod that let go, thank goodness they were the Scat I-beam forged connecting rods, because that's probably what saved them. But this is the forged crank, what I have left of it. And as you can see, she's screwed. But look at that, number 5. A little bit of scoring, but dedicated oiling all to itself. So it works. I can tell you that right now, that works. Doing the oil system mod is worth it, and it only takes minutes. You gotta have your block empty. You gotta drill and tap 2 1/4-inch pipe thread holes for your crossover tube. And it really doesn't matter where you put the crossover tube. I just picked a couple of convenient locations. More convenient would have been a little bit more room here and here, say, and it would have been just a little short loop. But the short loops are hard to fit in. You need the distance to really make it good, because my last block was a 3/18, and I just did a short crossover, and I ended up turning the fittings a little bit more and making a loop come back this way, so it really didn't save me anything. But other than planning where you're putting the ports at, putting the extra oil gallery plug in and making sure you gotta shine a light up through the number 1 main oil gallery feed hole, and make sure that when you put it in, use a little bit of blue lock thread. Just, it's not going to go anywhere. It can't. It's forced in, it's pressed in, but hey, a little bit of insurance goes a long way. And just go until it's fully blocked off. You know it's blocked off. Then you put the new plug in just to cover up that hole and back it up, so it won't, there's no reason to back out, but you just do it anyway. Oh, you need to anyway, just to stop any other oil flow. But yeah, so 2 stacked core plugs and the crossovers, and you've modified your oil system for high RPM, and this is documented. They've used it on many oval track racing applications, and it's one of the, there is other ways to control the oil in the engines. Now, if you look in the lifter gallery, this is all smooth and tidy, and I polished it and buffed it one evening years ago. There used to be large tops at the lifter bores, and I ground them all down, sanded everything, buffed it, and it's smooth, it's tidy, it's nice. You can't get your fingernails on anything anywhere. But the only thing I should have done was, instead of opening up these areas and opening up these drain holes, well, this drain hole, what I should have done was made a block off plate and retained it somehow down there to actually block off the oil dripping onto the camshaft, because it drips onto the cam. This is a roller cam. It's got lots of lube from the lifters. I'm not worried about flattening alone. And it would have alleviated oil flow dropping down onto the crank and causing windage. So I may still do that, and if I do, I will show you guys what I do. Literally simple things like a little bit of sheet tin, some high temp sealer, and I can probably make just literally something that goes down with the dog bone. Here's one of the dog bones. You would take it and it goes on there. Or not dog bone, this is a spider plate, I'm sorry. What you end up doing is, all I would do is I would put something that was sandwiched underneath here, knock her down. Can't do much about the back, it's wide open back here anyway, so I'm not too worried. I might maybe put a deflector in there, but if I can block off these guys, then that will help control the oil again. And reducing windage, it's free horsepower. We're only talking 3 horsepower. But when you do all the little things all at once, you do garner a gain. The gain's not only for racing, it's for longevity. The better you can control your oil, the better your engine's going to live. That's why there's dry sump systems. That's why there's all kinds of steel trap trays, oil pan, oil scrape, crankshaft scrapers and oil control passages in your oil pans. Like, it's endless. But just a well thought out plan for longevity. That's the only reason why I do this is this engine was hitting 7,000 RPM without missing a beat. So I'd be silly to think that the crank was going to last. I actually, my scat crank, I had it machined 10 thou under because I didn't have the oil system mod done originally. And I destroyed the bearings and destroyed the crank. Had to get it machined 10 thou under and start all over again. Lesson learned. The funny thing is, the last stroker I did the oil system mod. Oh yeah, I beat the bearings out of it too. You might see a trend here. But yeah, anyway, beat the bearings out. And it is what it is. Learn the hard way and go forth and keep on trucking. You don't stop. There's no, oh no, I damaged it, now I don't want to do anything anymore. No, man, you just keep going. This is hot rodding. This is muscle cars. This is fun. This is get her done. There's no stopping, no going back. One other little trick I only recommend it if you're confident when you're putting in your cam bearings is, I don't know if you can see it all, but I have the oil hole partially blocked off. It's just to slightly restrict it, because everywhere there's a bearing surface, everywhere there's a lifter bore, everywhere there's a spot that oil will go in and bleed out, that is pressure loss. So by just clocking the cam bearings a touch, I might have 25% blockage there. That's enough for me to know that I've reduced the overall leakage areas just a little bit. It's just one more thing, man. That's all it is, just one more thing. But at the end of the day, the video is getting pretty long, so that's my stroker in a nutshell. I've got my head sitting over here. They need some work still yet, and I'm doing some special things with them, but that's a whole nother video. So for now, everybody have a good night. I'm Dave with Days of Glory Shopworks, and everybody have a good time. We'll see you next time.